let's see what happens here in chapter 47. There's a few themes that I think will emerge as we go through it, but let's get started. Let's see, Eileen, you were first on, so do you mind reading verses 1, 2, and 3?
Sure. Get down, sit in the dust, fair maiden Babylon. Sit dethroned on the ground, O fair Chaldea. Nevermore shall they call you the tender and dainty one. Grasp the hand mill and grind meal. Remove your veil. Strip off your train. Bare your leg. Wade through the rivers. Your nakedness shall be uncovered, and your shame shall be exposed. I will take vengeance and let no one intercede.
Great, thanks, Eileen.
Sure.
Let me close my door. I've got a bunch of dogs barking. Hang on. Okay, Eileen, what grabs you on that? Anything?
Well, he's speaking to he's speaking to the I think the people of Chaldea. He's referencing them as if they were women. But I don't think he's talking to women. I think he's talking to the population in general.
Seems to be. I think this fits in the genre or the form of this particular text is the oracle against the nations. So here there's oracles against Israel, of course, and the so-called punishment of Yahweh, but there's also oracles against all the nations, and here he really drills down into the Chaldeans. So any other thoughts about these first 3 verses or questions?
I have a slightly different translation of that last line. I will take vengeance and let no one intercede. This particular version says, I will take vengeance, I will spare no one, which that to me means, you know, everybody in the nation of if we're talking Babylonians, they were favored and they are favored no more.
Yeah.
Don?
Yeah. I mean, I agree with the idea of speaking against the city. It seems like there's a personification of the maiden with Babylon, but it also appears to me that whoever that person is, it's humbling to them, and it's a mockery of something that had gone on before. And they don't enjoy the same status as they had.
Nice. And Stephen, I think you had a thought.
Yeah, I just it just felt kind of shocking that it was switched and so addressed to like a female, and I didn't know why was that there at this time when it was written.
Yeah. Does anybody know Hebrew on this?
Daniel is.
Daniel, any thoughts from the Hebrew text?
Well, one thing that struck me in the first verse, Betulat Bat Bavel, it's a maiden of Babylon. The word used, Betulat, is used in translations I've seen elsewhere in some, I think it's translated as, within Isaiah, translated as virgin. And in some of the, I think, passages usually thought of as Christological. So,
yeah,
some of these fit the translation to the context here.
Right.
Yeah. The other thing striking about these 3 verses is how sensuous they are.
Well, there's that.
And almost intimate.
Well, and also it reminds of Adam and Eve in the garden, naked without shame. And suddenly when they bite the fruit, they are filled with shame. And the first thing they want to do is cover themselves up. So that image seems to surface here. Your shame shall be exposed. Your nakedness will be uncovered. Yeah, remove your veil, strip off your train, bare your leg, wade through the waters.
Hey, what does a woman feel when they read that? I mean, this is written by a man, and yet, or a group of men, and yet there is a certain humiliation that happens to a woman in this section.
I didn't take it at all to mean that. I mean, I just thought he was referencing the people they've been worshiping idols, and now they're just remove it, forget about it. There's only one God, and I didn't take it personally. I don't.
I didn't see it that way either, because to me, it's a personification of a city or a people or something. And
Right.
especially when they first describe, talk about fair maiden, you think of a fair maiden as maybe a woman of some wealth, of privilege. And then yet now she's got to, get the hand mill and grind the meal and walk in the river, and, she's going to be brought down. So I didn't see it as specifically aimed at women.
That's helpful, talking about it in terms of a personification.
Yeah.
That seems right. Okay, any other thoughts or feelings about those first three? Okay, it's clear that sorry, my dog keeps barking at me. It's clear that the end is nigh, and Babylon's time is running short. Let's pick up the next two verses. Don, I think you were second on, so do you mind reading those next two, 4 and 5?
Sure. Our Redeemer, whose name is God of hosts, is the Holy One of Israel. Sit silent, retire into darkness, O fail Chaldea. Nevermore shall they call you mistress of kingdoms.
Don, any thoughts there?
I don't know. I don't know how 4 got in there. I mean, I can't make a connection between 1, 2, and 3, and then all of a sudden 4 appears.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it almost seems out of place.
Although that interweaving or that juxtaposition of Yahweh, the monotheistic idea, over and against the gods of the nations, if you will, that juxtaposition is certainly made aware or made clear here.
And Dan, are cities feminine in Hebrew?
My grammar isn't that precise. I must say so I couldn't say that.
Yeah, I'm used to cities being a she. So this is a fallen queen of cities, sort of.
Yeah, and in fact, one translation referred to this as the queen of the kingdoms.
You know, I don't know, but sitting silently brings me smack into Advent for some reason, and retiring into darkness. That sense of liturgical quietness.
Well, that image is there for sure. Let's go to 6 and 7. Who will read those next two verses?
I will, Steve.
Oh, thanks, Steve.
Uh, I was angry at my people. I defiled my heritage. I put them into your hands, but you showed them no mercy. Even upon the aged, you made your yoke exceedingly heavy. Your thought, I shall always be the mistress still. You did not take these things to heart. You gave no thought to the end of it. This is mad God.
So,
And
so keep talking. What are you thinking about that?
well, it's like he was using the Babylonians he was upset with Israel, and he was using the Babylonians to come in there, and it seems like that's where this word mistress seems, I don't know, it makes my head spin a little bit. Like the Babylonians felt like they were a mistress of the one God, and he was using them to punish Israel, but then they just went too far. They didn't show mercy. It said they were made the yoke heavy on the aged. So it seems like these Babylonians really got puffed up.
Nice.
In again, I have another Bible because this whole thing kind of puzzled me. So I just looked it up in another place to get some other words. And that part in the beginning of 7, this says, you said, I will continue forever, the eternal queen, as you had mentioned the word queen instead of mistress. I think that, I think about even us as a country, the United States, where when you're in power, when you're in doing well and everything, you can't imagine not that we would ever fail as a country, that we would ever go down the tubes and I think that's what they're saying with the Babylonians. They thought, we're always going to be in power. We're the number one people. We're in control. And so they treated the Israelites very poorly. And, they took advantage of their situation.
Very, very fine. Well said. And a sobering application. Yeah, you gave no thought to the future. You just arrogantly, as Steve said, you're puffed up, and as a result, you're blinded by your situation. And the fact, the litmus test of that is you showed no mercy, even though you were a pawn or an agent in my effort to develop or to bless Israel and to create Israel as to bless Israel, to be a blessing to all the nations. And this time in captivity, while from the Israelite point of view was one of their most productive times, they flourished. The creativity, the taking of the oral traditions and writing them down and giving us what we have in the scriptures today was unparalleled. And yet I love that you were so arrogant, you showed them no mercy. And even upon the aged, you treated them as objects, not as people.
Just small note about the Hebrew. Mistress is probably a better translation. Gveret, or I think in modern Hebrew that's Mrs. used as a title, and that's consistent with the usage, say in verse 5.
what's the implication of that difference, would you say, between queen and mistress? If there is one.
I think a mistress, think of a household
Hmm.
rather than,
Rather than a ruler.
or an overlord, a possessor, somebody in charge.
You know, there's a book by Paul Woodruff called Reverence. I don't know if any of y'all have seen it. It's really, really special in that it takes that word reverence and opens it up as a way of understanding the virtues. And for example, in the Odyssey, wherever Odysseus went, he first tried to discern in his effort to get back home from the war in Troy. He discerned whether or not the people there had reverence, and reverence came to be the understanding that you have limits. You don't have a bird's eye view of the world. You're finite. You're limited, and as a result, there's a humility that comes with that, and an openness to the other, a hospitality to the stranger. And they failed on this count. They showed no reverence. They think they're all that, and really they got blinded by that. And so I think that theme will pop up again. Let's look at verse 8 and 9. And Daniel, would you read 8 and 9, and then and look at the Hebrew after you do, and see if there's anything that you can teach us.
Okay. First of all, I have to say I'm not particularly expert in Hebrew. It's more of 60 years of contact with it in synagogue, but I've not been a systematic student of it. So with that caveat, I'll do my best.
You're all we've got right now, so you'll have to do.
Okay. And now hear this, O pampered one, who dwell in security, who think to yourself, I am, and there is none but me. I shall not become a widow, or no loss of children. Continue.
Yeah. Verse
These
9.
two things shall come upon you suddenly in one day. Loss of children and widowhood shall come upon you in full measure, despite your many enchantments and all your countless spells. Okay.
Right.
Go ahead, a little more.
No, let's stop there. Anything grab you or emerge from?
Okay. Well, I take he asked me to comment on the Hebrew. My acquaintance with Isaiah and the prophets in general is through the prophetic readings that are done on Shabbat morning after the Torah reading, and there are lots of pieces of Isaiah in it. So I'm familiar with the singing, the trope that's associated with it, and verse 8 starts with an unusual trope that, to my mind, announces, I'm starting a new section here. I'm making a strong point, just in the music of it, on the word now.
Meaning now hear this. It's
yep. Listen up.
Yeah. And what
so there's a change. There's a change in tone. There's also there's a change in the length of the lines. So the cadence changes, just from the point of poetry. You can see that in the English too.
Don, does that strike you in some way?
Well, it strikes me in this sense, and I may be wrong in this, but it seemed to me the Hebrew slaves caused great benefit to Babylon in terms of its building, its artistic works, its financial structure. Now they were going to lose all this with the exile, with returning back. Babylon was going to be left standing out in the cold. Anything that they were able to benefit from and either trade or transport out of that area to other nations was going to be gone. Their raw resources and labor was going to disappear. So they're left in this vacuum that God is telling them about. They had security, but now they don't have this labor force anymore. They don't have security now. So that is the connection I make, whether that's right or wrong. I don't know.
Well, it certainly points to a false security, and I loved how Daniel spoke of a change in tone in the text, in the poetry, and so now maybe what we've seen in those first verses is like an outside in, you know, a recognition that your days are numbered, and you think that you're gonna be in control and in power forever, as Terry spoke of so eloquently about the U.S. and the presumption that we're here forever, and yet we're very vulnerable, as we're starting to feel.
Can I add something to what I said?
Please.
So in the exile, at the time it happened, the Hebrews took all this wealth with them, and you know, from Egypt, that left Egypt barren, and was a cause of the Pharaoh chasing them. They discovered that they were valuable to Egypt, and so they didn't want them to escape. They went after them and chased them to try and contain them. So I think there's a parallel between that story of Exodus and this reading from Isaiah, in terms of returning and going back or being taken away from Babylon.
Well, I'm not quite sure about that, except that yes, those themes of creation and Exodus are woven throughout these texts. And I think, Stephen, you had a thought.
Yeah, I was looking more on verse 9 and just how rapid the fall was going to be, and that, you know, this was, you know, you've been bad for a long time, but this is all going to happen quickly when you do fall. I just wanted to point that out.
Well, it reminds me of Jesus's apocalyptic saying in the little apocalypse in Mark chapter 13, for example, and in all the Gospels, he talks about, you know, get ready. You see these stones on this temple, they're gonna, not one will be left in place. And it was unimaginable. It's like, no, this is eternal. We are here forever. And yet the worst case scenario happened when the Romans destroyed the temple. So yeah, there's apocalyptic language running throughout this text as kind of a wake-up call to help them recognize their finitude, their limits, to show how irreverent they are in imagining that they are that they don't need anything else than what they've already got. So what else?
Reverend Kenny? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I was thinking about two things Donna said. One about looking for parallels with the Exodus and the other's earlier comment about back on verse 4 about our Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, being mentioned. And I think I don't agree with the comment about the parallel with the Exodus, because except for verse 4, there's no mention, no hint of any connection to Israel. If you scan this whole chapter, and it's almost as if that was inserted to remind the reader, hey, here's the larger context. Because if you look, verse 5 fits with verse 1 through 3. And like Don said earlier, verse 4 doesn't fit at all. So I'm wondering if, that's an insertion.
Hey, Daniel, what about in 6 where he says, I was angry at my people,
Correct.
I defiled
Correct.
my
Yeah.
heritage?
Yeah, I see that. Yeah.
And I
What-
guess some of what makes me think, when the Israelites got sent to Babylon, it was because they had drifted away from following God. They had embraced all kinds of things. And so the Babylonians took them captive. And now he's pointing out again all these things that the Babylonians held on to other than God. It's their enchantments and their countless spells. So I guess like all of us, we tend to drift towards the worst thing we can possibly drift towards, left to our own devices.
And then we start grasping at straws or trying to manipulate or use, astrological signs and wonders or whatever it takes to avoid the void. To imagine that we are invincible.
It becomes to me like God is a centering place for a nation of people. That there has to be a connection, otherwise things get a little hairy.
You mean the false security based on the illusion of our invincibility?
I mean, with the I don't know how to express it, with the law and the prophets and the Torah, there was a set of standards the way God expected Israel to live. When you get away from that, wonky things happen. And that connection between a people and God, or between goodness and evil, gets stretched, even in terms of how we treat others.
I sort of see where that with 6 that God is saying that he's orchestrated this whole thing. He was angry with his people, so I let you, Babylon, overtake them and take them captive. But then you went too far. You showed them no mercy. And then there's a bit of because the Babylonians weren't monotheistic. They had their idols and their, and then it goes into, do you think you'll be, then he's saying, I'm going to do away with you, Babylon, because you showed no mercy. It's a sort of, I sent my people there, you showed no mercy. You got too strong, you got too high-headed. Now I'm going to get you and see if all your spells and wonders are going to save you from me. It is as you say, it's monotheistic, although the Babylonians weren't monotheistic from the beginning.
Well, and I think the genius of Isaiah's radical monotheism and really drawing attention like no other prophet had done up to this point, to really highlight that dramatic transcendence of a personal God who is able to talk about so intimately his people and the punishments and the rewards, and yet that monotheism in Isaiah, the genius of it for me is in relativizing all other sources of power or efforts to maintain our own control, to be our own gods, as the Adam and Eve story, suggests, where, hey, if God's against me and can't be trusted, I need wisdom. This apple will make me wise. I need something to avoid the void. So I love how Isaiah's just relativized that and shows our own nakedness and need for connection in
Steve,
that deeper way. Yeah, Don.
don't you think that with the sections of Isaiah, the Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and the first section of Isaiah, and even today thinking about the third section of Isaiah, that this was also had some historic looking back and from a factual standpoint at all? I mean, the people in second Isaiah had a grasp of events that happened where they could make these comparisons that we see in Isaiah 47. And I think what I'm saying is this is related to 46 and 45 and 48. This is related to the prophecy of the book as a whole in all of its sections. I think. I could be wrong about that, but I probably am, but
I wondered about that too, because I know when we started Isaiah that you had talked about the time periods, when it was written. Is this written after the fact? And so or is it prophetic in that it's going to happen, or is it recording what happened?
I think it's beautiful in a sense that it could be taken any of those ways, Terry.
Hmm.
It could be taken for the past, the present, and the future. And I really think that's what the inspiration of God does to these authors and redactors. They pen this in such a way that it can be read from multiple viewpoints. And that's what makes it timeless, I think.
It is Abraham Joshua Heschel puts it in his book, The Prophets, that I've referred to. The prophet, the prophetic consciousness, if you will, has emptied itself so deep, so much, so that it can have empathy for the pathos of Yahweh, and can discern so deeply that it becomes insightful about the future, about the past, about the present. And so basically it's sympathy for God's passion and compassion for the world, for his beloved. And so, yes, I don't know that it's predicting things as much as just accessing.
But I mean, I think Terry hit it on the head, hit the nail on the head when she said you can make a comparison of America in this section. I mean, that whenever this was written, we're far away from that in time, and yet we can see parallels. Mm-hmm. And I bet we have the same fears as those people.
Yeah, that rings true for me. Eileen, you had a thought?
This is the scariest reading so far. I mean, I'm thinking about America today and what's happening in the world, and where our strength is going to have to come from our souls, from our belief in a God, to carry us through this. If this is what's happened in the past, I see it in our future. I mean, this is a real scary reading to me.
Yeah, I feel that.
It's very powerful.
Well, I think it really gets going here. So let's keep it going. And Eileen, would you read, please, verses 10
Sure.
and 11?
You were secure in your wickedness. You thought, no one can see me. It was your skill and your science that led you astray. And you thought to yourself, I am, and there is none but me. Evil is coming upon you, that you will not know how to charm away. Disaster is falling upon you, that you will not be able to appease. Coming upon you suddenly is ruin of which you know nothing.
Right.
It just got scarier.
Seriously, no matter what your politics are, it's
Right.
really scary.
Yeah.
But that's the point. It transcends all that bullshit, you know, all that political intrigue and manipulating in the effort to be secure and to promote ourselves over and against the other. And the reality of finitude just breaks in like a club. And I think verse 10, you thought you could rely on your skill, your science, and you thought to yourself, I am, and there is none but me. That's the classic definition of solipsism, you know, solus ipse, the self stuck on itself. And no matter, to a solipsist or a narcissist, who can be very charming and knows how to manipulate in ways that are worldly amazing, but it doesn't last. And the solipsist can believe in God all day long, can believe all the right stuff, but in the heart is still unable to welcome the other and to show compassion, as we hear it here, for the elderly who has to carry heavy burdens without any mercy.
It kind of makes me think of, that Noah and the flood, that people were just carrying on and doing exactly whatever they wanted. They were getting married right up until the last minute, and then it was too late.
Well, and here's where I think it's an important contrast between the Deuteronomic idea of blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience, the old apple carrot or stick approach. Is, remember, in the flood story, God regretted ever creating the world, and so he vows to blot it out after Noah and his family, after the waters recede. Just a few verses later, it says, and there was only evil continually. Nothing changed. And that's when God says, I'm going to hang up my war bow. The rainbow is that doesn't work. I can't coerce obedience. And I think Isaiah, unlike the Deuteronomic literature, he assumes it, but he says that's not the last word, even though we continually disobey and continually fall into solipsism. I will not abandon you. I'm never going to stop trying to call you into relationship that gives you right relationship, justice. That word justice is right relationship. And so it's the opposite of solipsism. It's partnering with God. It's cooperating with each other in the process, and that leads to justice and mercy and compassion. But when solipsism rules, and when you have solipsistic rulers, then the chaos of the flood overtakes us all over again. So God bless us. All right, let's where are we now? Who has it read? Okay, great. Stephen, would you read these next two verses?
Stand up with your spells and your many enchantment, of which you labored since youth. Perhaps you will be able to profit. Perhaps you will find strength. You are helpless despite all your art. Let them stand up and help you now. the scanners of heaven, the stargazers, who announce month by month, whatever will come upon you.
It just doubles down
Yeah.
on this idea of our efforts to fill the void, to avoid the void, and the denial of death. And it's snarky. It's like, you know, come on. You really imagine all that is going to save you? What are you thinking? Don, you had your hand
Yeah,
up.
I'm just thinking 10 and 11 really talk about personal talents, and 12 and 13 start to move into the occult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting.
And each of them is negated in terms of being able to stop what is happening. I mean, personal talents and the occult, even though it's practiced, is not enough to stop what is being prophesied here.
Yeah, the illusions of security. Let's see.
Like that,
Richard?
I like
Oh,
that
Steve,
way,
go
the
ahead.
way you said snarky, Steve, because it does sound like he's saying to him, you know, stand up, try all that stuff that you've been relying on since your youth, and you know, maybe it'll profit you, or maybe you'll find strength. But it's like he knows they won't, but he's saying, go ahead, just have your fill of yourself. So,
Yeah, good. And again, it's that genius of monotheism that that transcends our best efforts to save ourselves through our own ingenuity, our own God, the gods that we create, which and invest in, as if we are gods ourselves. Yeah, it's just kind of, it's absurd to imagine that we're going to die. We're limited. And so have reverence and reach out to the other instead of trying to dominate the other. Let's finish up, Richard, if you can finish with the 14 and 15, and then we'll just open it up and just have a conversation with the time we've got left.
See, they are become like straw. Fire consumes them. They cannot save themselves from the power of the flame. This is no coal for warming oneself, no fire to sit by. This is what they have profited you, the traitors who dealt with you since youth. They have all wandered off on separate paths. There is none to save you.
Any thoughts, Richard?
Rather dire.
Rather dire. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, if it was talking to the Babylonians as a prophecy, I'm sure that they were snickering. If it was written afterwards and as a historical record, excuse me. Well, I have to take this. I'll be right back.
Oh, please do. Go ahead. Anybody else?
Yeah, I've been looking at the tone of the whole chapter, and there's a change. Well, not tone, the voice. There's a change in the 14th verse. Everything up to then has been addressed apparently to the Chaldeans. It's second person.
Mm-hmm.
14, it switches into the third person. Like the speaker has turned his attention away from one group of listeners to another.
Mhm.
And this, I think, solves a problem that's been bothering me all through this reading is if verses 1 through 13 are addressed to the Chaldeans, does the writer seriously expect that those people are listening to him? It's for effect of addressing a different audience, but as if he was speaking to the now deposed oppressors.
What do you make of it?
That he wasn't really speaking to the Chaldeans to begin with. That he was making a point about his power and his wrath and the, what should I say, pretensions of people in general.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems.
So I was about to say, if this is written afterwards, it could be just the writer of this ascribing a historical event that happened to the power of of God, of Hashem. It's just saying that, oh, these people who we didn't like, their empire fell, and it was because our God, destroyed them. But it was after the fact. It only empowers God if it was written beforehand, if it's actually a prophecy. So I don't know what the historical when it was written, whether it was before or after the demise of the Babylonian Empire, or it could have just been wishful thinking at the time it was written, but then it became true because the Babylonian Empire. Historically, all empires have fallen at one point or other. That's why I don't know why Americans think that our empire is so sacrosanct. It too could possibly fall, and most likely will at some point, sooner or later.
Yeah. So
Cheery.
what do you make
It's
of
just it may not be cheery, but if you look at all the empires of the world, they've come and they've gone.
right?
Right.
Some have
But so
lasted a very
Isaiah's
long period of time, and some not.
Yeah, so it's not like he's predicting this as if he's just stating a deep universal truth, right?
Right. Mhm. But all empires think that they're in perpetuity. If you go to during the height of any empire, if you talk to the people, they would, their leadership and the people think that that's the way it's going to be, like forever. But we have enough of a track record in humanity to know that that's not the way history works, or it may in the future, but it hasn't in the past.
Yeah, and it's that intoxication of power that corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely, as has been said. And the illusions of grandeur here are just mocked. It's just, come on, people. In other words, it's like, I think Isaiah invites us to see as God sees, instead of as we see. And what do we see when we access the stage of history through the eyes of God? I think that's partly what it means in that Jewish Christian prayer we call the Lord's Prayer. Hallowed be thy name. I tend to think of that as, help us see as you see. We hallow your name, your reality, not our name, not our reality. So help us see and feel and think as you see and feel and think. And what do you see? You see the futility of trying to secure our own selves in some absolute way. So it's bad, it's dire, but I also think there's so much wisdom here to reorient our thinking, our being, to pay attention to the other. And I think we'll see this more deeply when we get into Isaiah 53, the suffering servant text that talks about humility and approaching everybody and everything from the bottom up instead of from the top down. In those suffering servant texts there's like 4 of them throughout Second Isaiah. I think those are key to being able to diagnose the problems in our own country right now.
I think there's a certain amount of difficulty in applying any of these texts to contemporary politics. I know that Christians do that a lot, evangelicals particularly, but I think that's rife with error and misappropriation of text. I know that what I would call a fundamentalist Jews in Israel do this too, where they think that all this land belongs to them because there's an ancient text, and that this is prophetic for them in the current conflict. And it's very problematic. It just causes a lot of problems when people do that, in my opinion.
Is there are you, I'm not sure I understand. So we're talking about a universal relevance here in the idea of how idolatry doesn't work.
Yeah, that's how I would look at it too, that this is a universal, that you can look at this in general terms. When you take this and then apply it to a specific current event, it, in my opinion, becomes extremely problematic. This is not a prophecy of the Israel-Hamas war, for example, but someone could read this and say that it is, and look at it that way. And some people do.
But I think we can get tied up in a knot here, considering this as a section that stands alone. This is related to a speech that was given in 46.
Right.
You know, so just taking it piecemeal, not considering the party to whom it was addressed in chapter 45 and 46, gives a distorted view. But I hear what you're saying about people using scriptures to say the day of the Lord is coming. That kind of fundamentalist thinking. I agree with you that, because I don't know that humans can understand the mind of God in terms of our current situation in the world.
Well, and there's just a lot of bad theology out there, right? And there was a book called The Late Great Planet Earth that came out in the late 60s by Hal Lindsey. And he did, you know, he tried to say this means that, and that means this. And then he said, and yeah, it gets silly. It gets crazy, but that also is another effort to avoid the void, right? It's another effort to control, and calls us back into arrogance as if we know, as opposed to just that open, humble, you know, showing mercy, not falling into solipsism, learning how to be righteous in the way the biblical talks about right relationship. So Richard, thanks for that. I mean, do you want to say anything else? I mean, I think
No, I think Don did a much better job of saying what I was trying to say.
Nice.
But he's a lot smarter than I am.
Oh,
Yeah,
no.
but he's not as faded and celebrated as you are. Okay, everybody okay? Anything else? You know, God bless all of us.
Yeah.
And so I don't know the schedule for next week. I know I won't be here. Are we on for next week?
Yeah, I think we are, but we're not on the following week.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll have to look again. Then Rabbi David will be here for sure then. Okay. All right,
Yeah,
everybody.
He's
Peace.
due back next week. Yeah. He's
Happy holidays.
All right.
Yeah.
Happy holidays.
Bye, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.